Welcome back to English Podcast Go. I'm Cyrus, and each episode brings you closer to confident English. Let's jump into today's episode.
Welcome to the deep dive. Ever wonder why some days you're just buzzing with motivation and others you can barely even start that one thing you know you need to do?
Yeah, that feeling is universal, isn't it?
Totally. So today we're tackling that feeling head on. We're diving deep into the science of dopamine.
Dopamine, everyone talks about it.
Right, and usually it's about pleasure. But our source material today, we're drawing from excerpts of the Huberman Lab podcast, specifically the one called Leverage Dopamine to Overcome Procrastination and Optimize Effort. It explores dopamine's absolutely essential role in something much more practical.
Things like pushing past procrastination.
Exactly. And maintaining consistent motivation, even building genuine confidence. So our mission in this deep dive is to really pull back the curtain on the actual mechanics, how dopamine works in your brain, how its levels shift all the time.
And the practical side.
Yes, most importantly, extract those practical science-backed strategies you can actually use to leverage your own dopamine system to get things done, move towards your goals.
And this is really where the rubber meets the road, isn't it? Because it's one thing to just try to be more motivated.
Sure, we all try that.
But it's completely different when you understand the biological system that's actually driving that motivation or that procrastination.
Right.
Understanding the why. The neurobiology just makes the tools we'll talk about feel so much more powerful, more actionable for you because you actually see what's happening inside your own head.
Okay, let's really unpack this then. When most people think dopamine, they think reward.
Right. That's the common connection.
Like eat a cookie, feel good. Dopamine. Is that the whole picture?
It's the simplified view, yeah. But it misses so much critical nuance. Dopamine is actually a neuromodulator.
Okay, what does that mean exactly?
It means it changes the activity of other neurons. Think of it less like a simple on switch for pleasure and more like a volume knob or maybe a director coordinating things.
Oh.
So while it is released when you get a reward, its main job, especially in the brain circuits we're focusing on, for motivation and drive, it's really about the pursuit of things.
Pursuit, not the reward itself.
It fuels the wanting, the drive, the going after. And it's fundamentally involved in, navigating challenges, overcoming that inertia of procrastination.
That feeling of being stuck.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And building that solid sense of confidence that comes when you successfully pursue something.
So it's less about the happy dance after you finally get the cookie and more about the energy that gets you off the couch to even go find the cookie in the first place.
Precisely that. It's about understanding that engine, that underlying drive, and then leveraging it.
Okay. Now, the source mentioned several dopamine pathways in the brain. Are they all doing this?
Well, there are about 5 main circuits, give or take. But for what we're talking about today, motivation, drive, procrastination, we're really zeroing in on one key pathway.
Which one is that?
It's called the mesocortical pathway.
Mesocortical.
Yeah, think of it like a major highway.
Yeah.
Runs from some older, deeper brain areas, the ones involved in reward and motivation, like the VTA and nucleus accumbens, up to your prefrontal cortex.
That's the bit behind the forehead, right? The planning center.
Exactly. The part responsible for planning, making decisions, controlling impulses. Your executive function lives there.
So why is that connection from the sort of motivation zone to the planning zone so important for understanding why we procrastinate or why we actually do things?
Because that pathway is fundamentally involved in governing your big choices, your high-level decisions, planning your actions, actually executing those plans. And this is critical, suppressing all the competing impulses.
Stopping distractions.
Yes. The prefrontal cortex uses dopamine signals from this pathway to put the brakes on stuff that isn't relevant right now. It helps you understand context.
Okay,
Like knowing you can joke around with friends at home, but you need to be focused and, professional at work. Different contexts, different behaviors needed.
Okay.
So this circuit is absolutely central to your overall motivation, your drive, and how you experience that friction, that diffuse feeling of procrastination when you're facing a goal.
So it powers the whole goal-directed behavior thing.
Pretty much. It's the general engine pushing you to pursue anything, not just one specific reward.
Yeah.
That's why it impacts getting anything done, whether it's a huge project or just, taking out the trash.
Okay, that makes sense. It's the link between wanting something and actually being able to plan for it, focus on it, and get started. So how do the levels of dopamine in this system actually work? Is it just steady all the time?
Oh, not at all. It's incredibly dynamic, always shifting. The source material highlights 3 really crucial states to understand.
Okay, what are they?
There's your dopamine baseline, dopamine peaks, and dopamine troughs.
Baseline, peaks, troughs.
Your baseline is kind of like the standing water level in a swimming pool. It reflects your general day-to-day level of motivation, your sense of well-being when you're not like intensely wanting something specific.
Okay, your average state.
Exactly. Then you have dopamine peaks. These are surges, waves going above that baseline level.
What causes those?
They get triggered by anticipating something you desire, seeing cues associated with that desire, or actually receiving a reward you were seeking.
The cookie moment.
Could be, yeah. And then there's the dopamine trough. This is a drop below your baseline level, and this part is critical and often really misunderstood.
A drop below normal. Okay.
Let's use that pool analogy again. Baseline is the water level. Peaks are the waves rising up.
Right.
Now, if you have really big waves, or really fast, frequent waves,
Right.
they splash water out of the pool, right?
Mm-hmm.
And over time, if that happens a lot, your overall water level, your baseline, can actually drop.
Okay, so big highs can lead to a lower starting point later.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
And here's where it gets super interesting and connects directly to motivation and why you act.
Mm.
When you desire something strongly, that triggers a peak in dopamine.
Right, the anticipation.
But often, almost immediately after that peak starts, your dopamine level begins to drop. And it doesn't just go back to baseline. It drops below baseline. That's the trough.
Okay.
And it's this drop, this uncomfortable feeling of being below your normal level that actually generates the powerful drive, the motivation to act, to pursue the thing.
Why?
In an attempt to get your dopamine levels back up, to get back to baseline, or even chase another peak.
Whoa. So that feeling of wanting something so badly it almost hurts.
Yes.
That's the trough. That's the signal pushing you to move.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
It's your brain system basically saying, hey, I'm in a lower state here. I need to engage with the world, do something to fix this.
Huh. That reframes wanting completely.
It does. And there's another layer, reward prediction error.
Reward prediction error. Sounds complex.
It's actually pretty intuitive. When you finally get the reward, your dopamine system compares what you actually got to what you expected to get. If the reward is better than you expected, the next time you encounter those cues or start that pursuit, the dopamine peak associated with it will likely be bigger. Your brain says, ooh, that was good, pay attention.
And if it's worse, like the cookie was stale,
Then the peak will be smaller next time, or maybe the trough that follows will be even deeper. Your brain learns, maybe not worth as much effort.
so the system is constantly learning and adjusting based on expectation versus reality.
Constantly. And it learns not just about the final reward, but also about the cues that predicted it, and even the effortful journey between wanting and getting. That's called reward contingent learning. Plus, there's this sort of background sustained lower level dopamine release during the pursuit itself.
Like fuel for the journey.
Kind of like a constant propeller pushing you along while you're working towards the goal. It's a learning machine and a drive machine.
Okay. This is complex, but makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned seeing these dynamics in an extreme form, addiction. How does looking at something that serious help us understand everyday motivation?
Well, addiction provides a really stark, almost amplified illustration of these peak and trough dynamics we've been talking about.
How so?
Addiction is often characterized by this progressive narrowing of things that bring pleasure or motivation. The world kind of shrinks down.
Right.
And that often happens because the dopamine system gets hijacked by experiences or substances that cause these unnaturally huge dopamine surges. Take something like cocaine, for example.
Okay.
It causes a massive
Yeah.
and critically and incredibly fast peak in dopamine release in key brain circuits.
Fast peak. Why is the speed important?
Remember the rule we talked about? Big, fast peak tends to lead to a deep, long-lasting trough below baseline afterward. The speed is key because the brain learns associations based on timing.
Oh.
If you have a very short time gap, like milliseconds or seconds, between taking a substance and getting that enormous dopamine hit, your brain learns to prioritize and intensely crave those super short intervals, which then makes the slower, more effortful, longer interval pursuits required for things like work or studying or exercise. They start to feel almost irrelevant by comparison. The system gets skewed towards immediate, intense reward.
Wow. Okay. That makes sense. It rewires priorities.
It does, and the cycle becomes really vicious. That deep, painful trough after such a high peak, it's experienced as intense craving, anxiety, discomfort. Basically, pain.
Right.
So the subsequent pursuit, the next time the person seeks the drug, it's often driven less by a desire for the original pleasure and more by this desperate need to just escape the pain of the trough.
Just to feel normal again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or what passes for normal once the baseline has been driven down so low. This can lead to chasing smaller and smaller peaks from the same thing, or needing more of it, or seeking even more intense substances or behaviors just to get temporary relief from that deep trough state.
That sounds exhausting and destructive.
It is. And just to give you a sense of the sheer scale of difference we're talking about, let's compare typical dopamine neuron activity levels, like how often they're firing per second.
Okay, put it in perspective.
Your normal baseline firing rate might be, say, 3-4 times per second. Pretty chill.
Right.
Natural rewards, like anticipating or eating food you really like or having sex.
Yeah.
These might double, triple, maybe quadruple that baseline rate. So nice increases, but in the same ballpark.
Still natural levels.
Yeah. Something like nicotine might cause about a 150% increase over baseline. Caffeine may be doubling, though it works a bit differently.
Okay. Noticeable bumps.
But then you look at highly addictive substances. Cocaine can cause around a 1,000% increase over baseline.
1,000%.
Yep. And methamphetamine. Estimates range from 1,000% to even 10,000% increases. Video games, depending on the game and person, can be 5 to 10-fold increases. Sex can double dopamine for hours afterwards in some cases, maybe a 4 or 5-fold peak during.
That difference in scale is just staggering. 10,000% versus maybe 400% for food.
Exactly. That vast difference really helps explain why these substances cause such profound system-altering peaks and why the subsequent troughs are so deep and disruptive.
Right.
And it highlights why recovery is so incredibly difficult. The source mentions it often requires significant time, sometimes around 30 days of abstinence, is cited as a rough period needed for the brain circuits to even begin resetting from that deep trough state and start rebuilding the baseline.
That sounds like a really tough month.
Extremely tough. And strategies like binding behaviors can sometimes help during recovery, or even for managing less extreme compulsive behaviors.
Binding behaviors.
Yeah, things like only allowing yourself access to something. Maybe it's social media, maybe it's a substance someone is trying to quit, only within very specific time windows, or only in certain locations.
Creating rules and limits.
Exactly. It helps re-engage that prefrontal cortex, the planning and impulse control part of the brain, retraining it to exert control based on context, rather than just reacting to the craving from the trough.
Wow, okay. That addiction example really does make the peak-trough dynamic crystal clear. So, flipping this around, if those huge peaks and troughs derail everything, how do we apply this understanding to pursue healthy goals? How do we keep our wave pool full, maintain that healthy baseline?
Excellent question. That's the constructive application, right? Maintaining a healthy dopamine baseline is absolutely fundamental. It's the foundation you build everything else on. If your baseline is too low, you just won't have the capacity for sustained motivation and drive.
So what builds it up? What keeps the water level high?
Well, the science points pretty clearly to several foundational practices. These are things that consistently help build and maintain that baseline level of dopamine.
Okay, what are they? Essentials.
Absolutely essential. First, sufficient quality sleep, non-negotiable. Sleep is when your brain literally cleans house and restores its neurotransmitter reserves, including dopamine.
Sleep first. Got it.
Second, things like non-sleep deep rest, or NSDR protocols. Yoga Nidra is a common example. Yeah, these are guided relaxation or meditation-like practices. Studies mentioned in the source show they can significantly increase baseline dopamine levels, sometimes by as much as 65%. And there are tons of free resources for these online.
Wow, 65% increase just from resting.
From that specific kind of structured rest. Yeah. Third, proper nutrition. Your brain needs the raw materials to make dopamine. The main one is an amino acid called tyrosine.
Tyrosine, where do you get that?
It's found in protein-rich foods. Things like Parmesan cheese are surprisingly high, also various meats, nuts, seeds, leafy green vegetables. Basically, a balanced diet helps ensure you have the building blocks.
Makes sense. Feed the machine.
Fourth, morning sunlight exposure. Getting bright light, preferably sunlight, in your eyes early in the day without sunglasses if possible.
How long?
The recommendation is usually around 5-10 minutes on a clear day, maybe 10-20 if it's cloudy, 20-30 if it's really overcast. This helps anchor your circadian rhythm, boosts cortisol healthily for daytime alertness, and also influences dopamine release.
Simple but powerful. Okay.
And fifth, regular movement and exercise. This is huge. Both resistance training and cardiovascular exercise are potent ways to elevate and maintain your baseline dopamine over the long term. It's a cornerstone for mental and physical well-being, definitely including motivation.
So sleep, NSDR rest, nutrition, sunlight, exercise, the fundamentals.
Those are the big ones. And while sure, genetics and your life circumstances play a role in your baseline, these practices are beneficial for pretty much everyone. They form the bedrock for supporting your dopamine system.
Okay, so that's how we build the baseline. What about protecting it? What drains the pool unnecessarily besides, addictive substances?
Good point. You protect your baseline primarily by being mindful of behaviors or substances that cause those excessively high or unnaturally rapid dopamine peaks, especially if they happen too often.
Because big peaks mean...
Big peaks tend to mean deeper, longer troughs afterward, which can lower the overall baseline over time. So moderation with things known to spike dopamine intensely is key.
Like what, beyond drugs? Maybe intense social media use?
Or could be. It also means being aware that even natural, really intense peak experiences can be followed by a trough. Think about finishing a huge project or an amazing vacation, or even major life events like having a baby. The joy is immense, but it's often followed by a period of lower mood or energy. Postpartum depression has dopamine system links, for instance.
Ah, the post-vacation blues or post-achievement slump. That's a biological thing.
It has a strong biological component, yes. Understanding the peak-trough dynamic can help you anticipate and navigate those periods, realizing it's not necessarily a personal failing, but your system recalibrating.
That's actually really helpful to know.
And a really crucial practical point for protecting your baseline, especially for everyday motivation, is to avoid stacking multiple high dopamine activities or compounds together. Particularly, don't stack them onto activities you already find intrinsically rewarding.
Stacking, like drinking coffee while scrolling Instagram while listening to music.
Could be like that, yes. Or, more specifically related to motivation, think about that famous Stanford study with the kids and drawing.
Right, the gold star experiment you mentioned.
Exactly. The kids initially enjoyed drawing just for its own sake, intrinsic motivation. Then they got external rewards, gold stars, which likely caused dopamine peaks on top of their intrinsic enjoyment.
Okay.
But when the researchers stopped giving the stars, the kids' interest in drawing, the time they spent doing it, actually dropped below where it started before any rewards were involved.
So adding the external reward actually killed the internal drive.
It significantly diminished it long term. Piling on external dopamine hits onto something you already enjoy can essentially teach your brain that the activity isn't worth doing without the extra boost. It robs future motivation.
Wow.
I've definitely noticed this myself,
Yeah.
Trying to supercharge every workout with pre-workout supplements or every intense work session with extra caffeine.
Yeah.
Eventually, the activity itself started feeling a bit bland or effortful unless I had that external boost. The intrinsic enjoyment got eroded.
That totally resonates. It's like you start doing the thing for the boost, not for the thing itself anymore. Okay, this is huge. Let's bring it right back to that core struggle then. Procrastination. You're sitting there, staring at the task, feeling zero motivation. What do you actually do with all this knowledge?
Right, the moment of truth. When you feel that heavy blanket of procrastination, that complete lack of motivation that, I can't even start feeling.
Yeah, we've all been there.
That's a strong signal. You're likely in a dopamine trough or maybe operating from a generally low baseline at that moment. That feeling of bleh is the low dopamine state, essentially.
Okay, so I'm in the trough. What now?
Well, what do people usually do? They often just wait, hoping motivation will magically appear.
Which rarely works reliably in my experience.
Exactly. Or they do procrastivity. They suddenly feel this intense urge to do some other less important but maybe slightly less painful task. Like, I should be writing that report, but my desk really needs organizing right now.
Yeah. Guilty as charged. Cleaning the whole house to avoid one email.
We've all done it. But the science, based on these dopamine dynamics, suggests a very different, maybe counterintuitive strategy.
Okay, I'm ready. Lay it on me.
Instead of waiting for motivation or doing something easier, the suggestion is to actively leverage the trough.
Leverage the trough.
How? By intentionally engaging in something that feels harder or more uncomfortable than the state of unmotivation you're currently in.
Wait, what? My brain is already screaming, no! And you want me to do something more unpleasant? That sounds backwards.
It sounds backwards, but think about the mechanism. By forcing yourself, safely, through a state of deliberate, chosen discomfort, essentially creating a steeper but controlled trough for a brief period.
Okay.
You can trigger a more robust rebound effect. It can actually accelerate your dopamine levels back up towards or maybe even above your baseline faster than just waiting or doing something easy.
How? Why would adding more discomfort help?
It's about pushing against that limbic friction, that resistance from the more primitive parts of your brain. By imposing effort, you're essentially telling your system, see, we can act even when it feels bad. This forced activation seems to kickstart the dopamine system's recovery or upward swing.
Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around this. Give me examples, a safe example.
Absolutely. Safety first. The source gives a couple of really good ones. One is deliberate cold exposure.
Cold showers, ice baths.
Exactly. They are undeniably uncomfortable for most people, right? That initial shock, the feeling of wanting to get out.
Definitely uncomfortable.
But even brief exposure, say 30 seconds to a couple of minutes in genuinely cold water, maybe 37, 55 Fahrenheit or so, or even longer periods like 45, 60 minutes in just cool water around 60 F. This has been shown to significantly increase baseline dopamine for hours afterwards.
Hours from a couple of minutes of cold.
Yeah. The recommendation is often to do it in the morning, not right after strength training as it might blunt some muscle adaptations, but otherwise it's a potent tool. Just be sensible, don't risk hypothermia.
Okay, cold exposure. What else?
Another example given is meditation.
Meditation. I thought that was supposed to be relaxing.
It can be, but for many people, especially when they're feeling scattered or unmotivated, the act of forcing yourself to sit still, to focus on your breath, and to constantly bring your mind back when it inevitably wanders. That process can feel really effortful and frustrating.
True. Sometimes meditation feels like wrestling my own brain.
Exactly. That internal struggle, that effort to maintain focus against the grain of your current state, that qualifies as pushing through discomfort. Even just 5 or 10 minutes of that kind of effortful focus can count.
So it doesn't have to be physical pain. It can be mental effort or friction.
Precisely. The suggestion from the source is to maybe create a short list for yourself, say 5 things that you know are safe but require real effort or feel mildly painful to initiate when you're stuck in procrastination mode. And the key is, the goal isn't necessarily to become a master meditator or love cold showers in that moment. The goal of doing that harder thing is to use the act of pushing through the discomfort as a tool to shift your neurochemistry.
To get yourself out of the trough.
Exactly. To trigger that dopamine rebound so that when you turn back to your actual task, the one you were procrastinating on, it feels less daunting. You've changed your internal state.
Okay, that actually makes a strange kind of sense now. Using a small, intentional dose of difficulty as a lever to make the real difficulty feel more manageable because you've jump-started your motivation system.
You got it. You're using the system's own rebound dynamics to your advantage. And this leads us directly to what Huberman, in the source, often refers to as kind of the holy grail of this whole process.
The holy grail. Okay, what is it?
It's learning to associate the feeling of reward, not just with getting the final outcome, the cookie,
Right.
but learning to attach that dopamine release, that sense of reward, to the effortful process itself.
Reward the struggle. How does that even work?
It works because by repeatedly choosing to push through that initial discomfort, by leveraging the trough with those safe, effortful activities, by forcing yourself to engage when you don't feel like it, you are fundamentally training your brain.
Training it. How?
You are creating an association. You're linking the feeling of effort, the friction, the struggle, with the subsequent relief, the rise in dopamine, the improved state that follows that effort. Your brain starts to learn, oh, pushing through that hard part leads to feeling better.
So the effort itself starts to predict the reward state.
Exactly. This is where that phrase, friction becomes the reward, stops being just a catchy saying and starts becoming a neurobiological reality for you.
Wow.
And this ties in beautifully with all the research on growth mindset, right?
Yeah.
The work by Dr. Carol Dweck.
Yeah, the idea that you believe your abilities can be developed, the not yet idea.
Precisely. By leaning into the effortful state and associating it with positive internal shifts in your neurochemistry, you're not just thinking with a growth mindset. You're actually embodying it at a biological level. You're teaching your brain that effort leads to positive change.
That's incredibly powerful.
It really is. Because this ability, this trained response, is what allows you to pursue challenging long-term goals consistently. You can adapt when things inevitably get tough because the effort itself doesn't feel purely like aversive friction anymore. Eventually, you can even start to find a genuine sense of reward, satisfaction, and sustained motivation within the process of striving itself.
Moving from needing those external carrots all the time to finding the drive and the reward right there in the hard work.
It fundamentally changes your relationship with challenge and effort.
This has been an absolutely fascinating deep dive, really understanding something so fundamental to, well, just getting through the day sometimes.
It governs so much of our experience.
We started by moving beyond that simple pleasure chemical idea of dopamine.
Right, getting into the pursuit aspect.
I explored its complex dance of peaks, troughs, and the crucial baseline level.
The wave pool analogy.
Saw how extremes like addiction really highlight those
In
dynamics.
a scary way, yeah.
And then, most importantly, we talked about concrete, science-backed ways to actually build and protect our dopamine baseline: sleep, light, nutrition, movement, rest.
The foundations.
And maybe the most surprising part, how to actually leverage discomfort and effort itself to break through procrastination and ultimately make the journey, the effort, its own reward.
Turning friction into fuel.
Yeah. And the key takeaway for everyone listening, I think, is that this isn't just interesting information.
No, it's practical.
These are actual tools, strategies you can start experimenting with right now, today, to gain a greater sense of control over your own motivation, your own pursuit of whatever goals matter to you.
Absolutely. And that ability, we talked about the capacity to lean into difficulty, to find value, and even that sense of reward within the effort, within the struggle.
Yeah.
It's not just some psychological trick. It's a real, powerful, trainable, biological mechanism that is available to you.
It's built into the system if you know how to work with it.
Exactly.
So here's a final thought to leave you with. Take a moment, maybe later today, and actually think about it. What might your personal list of, say, 5 safe but genuinely effortful activities be? Things you could use when procrastination hits hard.
Good exercise.
And maybe, just maybe, the very next time you feel that heavy pull of procrastination, simply contemplating using one of those activities could be the very first small step towards shifting your own dopamine dynamics.